is the 25th anniversary of The Sixth Sense.
I see dead people.
A lot of time, of course, has passed. How close do you keep Bruce Willis to your heart?
Oh, very close. I mean, so wonderful working with him.
Think about it. You are watching a man sit across from his grieving wife in a quiet restaurant, completely unaware that he died months ago. For over 2 decades, M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense has been celebrated for its legendary twist ending. But the real magic isn't the reveal. It's the dozens of brilliant, invisible breadcrumbs hidden in plain sight. From psychological audio tricks to color-coded hauntings, let's unmask the 20 secrets that changed cinema forever. Secret number 1. The red monopolization. If you look closely at the visual landscape of Philadelphia in this movie, you'll notice an aggressive, almost obsessive pattern regarding the color red. This wasn't an aesthetic coincidence. It was M. Night Shyamalan's most rigid narrative rule. The color red was strictly quarantined during production, completely banned from ordinary sets, background wardrobes, or everyday street locations. It was exclusively weaponized to signal a profound connection, boundary tear, or raw emotional puncture wound inflicted by the afterlife. Think about the physical markers. The ruby-toned doorknob to the basement that Malcolm can never seem to turn. The crimson velvet dress his grieving wife Anna wears at the lonely restaurant table. The bright red shawl wrapped around Cole during his most terrifying panic attacks. And even the small digital numbers glowing on the tape recorder. Every single flash of scarlet is a visual alarm clock screaming that a ghost is altering reality. By draining the rest of the film into washed-out, muted grays, sickly greens, and cold blues, the production team ensured that your subconscious mind registered the color red as a supernatural intrusion long before your conscious brain could piece together the puzzle. It's a masterful piece of subliminal manipulation. Is it possible that the visual deceptions are only half the battle? Or does the very air they breathe hold an even colder truth? Next secret: temperature drops and thermodynamics. The sudden presence of freezing breath is one of the film's most famous horror tropes, but the secret lies in the strict narrative logic governing when the temperature plummets. It isn't just a generic side effect of a ghost walking into a room. It is a direct thermodynamic reaction to a spirit's intense, negative emotional spikes. Whenever a ghost experiences a surge of rage, grief, or unresolved trauma, they inadvertently drain the ambient kinetic heat from the immediate environment. Notice how the kitchen scene with Cole's mother begins perfectly normal. The air only turns to ice when the ghost of the abused housewife steps into the room, fueled by the memory of her own tragic past. The production team achieved this effect by turning the entire set into a massive, functional refrigerator, lowering the actual physical temperature of the room to just freezing so the actor's breath would condense naturally. This physical reality forced genuine, shivering performances out of the cast. It tells the subconscious mind that ghosts don't just occupy space, they violently disrupt the physical laws of nature based entirely on the weight of their own lingering, painful emotional baggage. Secret 3. The left-handed wedding ring clue. Bruce Willis is naturally left-handed, a trait that usually dictates which hand an actor uses for basic on-screen gestures. However, for The Sixth Sense, this became the foundation for one of the most brilliant continuity deceptions in cinematic history. In the opening scene of the film, before Malcolm Crowe is shot, he is clearly wearing his gold wedding band on his left hand. But for the entire remainder of the movie, Malcolm's left hand is intentionally hidden, shadowed, or kept buried deep inside his trouser pockets. This wasn't an accidental quirk of blocking. It was a mandatory directive from Shyamalan to hide a devastating reality. Malcolm is no longer wearing his wedding ring because his widow, Anna, took it off his body after he passed away. In the final, heartbreaking climax, the ring rolls out of Anna's hand as she sleeps, revealing that it was never on Malcolm's finger during any of his interactions with her or Cole. Willis had to train himself to perform every single action, from writing notes to gesturing during therapy sessions, exclusively with his right hand, to prevent the audience from noticing the glaring absence of that tiny gold band on his left. Secret 4. Cole's color spectrum shift. Cole Sear's wardrobe undergoes a radical psychological transformation over the course of the film that perfectly mirrors his internal emotional healing. In the first half of the movie, Cole is perpetually drowning in oversized, dark, suffocating layers. He wears heavy navy sweaters, dark charcoal jackets, and muted blacks that make him look visually swallowed up by his environment. This choice was designed to reflect his absolute isolation, fear, and the crushing weight of the terrifying secret he is carrying entirely alone. As Malcolm helps him understand his gift, Cole's color palette begins to shift toward whites, creams, and soft neutral tones. By the time he performs in the school play and finally opens up to his mother in the car, his clothing is light and unburdened. The dark armor is gone. This gradual wardrobe evolution subtly signals to the audience that Cole is no longer hiding from the world or the dead. He has transitioned from a haunted, terrified victim into a young boy who has found his voice, effectively using costume design to chart a profound psychological resurrection. Secret 5. The fogged glass imagery. Throughout the entire film, director M. Night Shyamalan heavily relies on the visual motif of condensation, frosted glass, and heavily fogged windows to act as a literal, physical boundary line between the living world and the afterlife. You can see this subtle framing choice play out during several of Malcolm's deeply emotional scenes. Whenever Malcolm is positioned near his wife Anna, there is almost always a pane of glass separating them, whether it is the window of her antique shop or the cold glass door of the basement, and that glass is consistently obscured by a heavy layer of mist or frost. This visual trick does double duty for the narrative. On your very first viewing, your brain instantly chalks the condensation up to the chilly atmospheric autumn weather of Philadelphia, perfectly blending into the somber mood of a failing marriage. But on a second pass, you realize the chilling truth. The fogged glass is a physical reaction to Malcolm's cold, ghostly presence lingering right next to it. The living world is literally reacting to his deceased state, forming a hazy cloud of moisture that symbolizes his complete inability to break through the veil and truly touch the woman he loves ever again. Secret 6. The Ghost Frequency Audio Design. One of the most unsettling secrets of The Sixth Sense isn't something you actually see on screen, but rather something your ears process entirely in the background. The film's sound design team utilized a highly sophisticated audio trick known as low-frequency atmospheric layering beneath almost every single scene where Bruce Willis interacts with the world. Underneath James Newton Howard's haunting musical score, the audio track features a deeply muffled, continuous white noise loop mixed with the slowed-down rhythm of a faint, distant human heartbeat. This custom sound design was meticulously engineered to trigger an instinctual, subconscious feeling of deep dread and sensory isolation in the audience. Because the frequencies are so incredibly low, you don't consciously recognize them as separate sound effects. Instead, they simulate the eerie, quiet sensation of being trapped underwater or inside a sealed tomb. The moment Malcolm enters a room, the background room tone subtly drops out, leaving only this ghostly, hollow frequency. It perfectly isolates his character sonically from the vibrant, natural acoustic atmosphere of the living characters around him, essentially burying Malcolm in a soundscape of death long before the narrative twist drops. Secret 7. The Direct Line of Sight Illusion. If you carefully watch the choreography and blocking of every single scene in this movie, you will discover an incredible piece of cinematic sleight of hand. Malcolm Crowe never actually moves an object, opens a door, or pulls out a chair in front of anyone other than Cole. When Malcolm sits down across from Cole's mother Lynn in the living room, the scene cleverly cuts after he is already seated. We never actually see him walk into the room, greet her, or physically interact with the furniture in her presence. This strict visual rule required absolute precision from the camera crew and the editors. Shyamalan had to craft the illusion of normal social interactions while strictly adhering to the physics of a ghost who cannot affect the material world. Whenever Malcolm appears to be interacting with an environment, the camera angle is intentionally placed in a deceptive line of sight. Your brain naturally fills in the blanks, assuming a polite greeting or a door being opened just off camera. In reality, Malcolm is merely a passive, invisible observer floating through these spaces, completely ignored by the living adults who literally cannot see or hear him. Secret 8. The Basement Door Paradox. The heavy wooden door leading down to Malcolm's basement office is the focal point of his domestic isolation, but it hides a massive architectural paradox that completely exposes his ghostly reality. Throughout the film, we see Malcolm standing in front of this door, key in hand, turning the knob and heading downstairs to work on his case files. Because he is dressed in his usual professional attire, your brain assumes he is simply retreating to his private home office like any tired, stressed-out husband would do after a long day. The terrifying secret is that this door is actually locked from the outside for the entire movie. If you look closely at the doorframe during the wider shots, the deadbolt and slide locks are entirely fitted on the kitchen side of the wall. Malcolm's wife, Anna, has locked the basement up to store the painful reminders of her late husband's life. Malcolm doesn't actually use a physical key to open the door, nor does he turn on a real mechanism. He simply passes right through the barrier due to his own psychological denial. His mind fabricates the familiar mundane action of reaching for his keys and opening the door to preserve his fragile illusion of being alive. Secret 9. The Restaurant Table Time Sinking. The anniversary dinner scene at the upscale restaurant is an absolute masterclass in editing deception. Malcolm arrives late, frantically apologizing to Anna for keeping her waiting on their special night. Anna sits in absolute icy silence, never once looking up at him, eventually snatching the check and leaving the table before he can even think about ordering food. It looks exactly like a bitter, heartbreaking portrait of a marriage that has completely deteriorated due to neglect and emotional distance. The secret hiding in plain sight here is the complete lack of basic back-and-forth dialogue or physical synchronized movement. Anna never acknowledges a single word Malcolm says because he isn't actually sitting there in her reality. She is dining completely alone on the anniversary of her husband's tragic death. The waiter only ever brings one check, one glass of wine, and sets the table for a single person. The editing team carefully timed the cuts to mask the fact that Anna's movements are entirely independent of Malcolm's presence. The heavy, sorrowful silence you feel in that room isn't the cold shoulder of an angry wife. It is the crushing weight of a widow's profound, isolated grief. With the physical space around them completely warped by the afterlife, how deep do the psychological traps run when the living start changing their own behavior? Secret 10. Bruce Willis's decoy slower cadence. To pull off a twist this massive, Bruce Willis had to completely reinvent his natural on-screen energy. Known for his witty, fast-talking, and high-octane personas in the late 90s, Willis adopted a shockingly muted, deeply deliberate vocal cadence for the character of Malcolm Crowe. He intentionally drags out his sentences, lowers his vocal register to a soft whisper, and implements unnatural, elongated pauses before responding to any line delivered by Cole Sear. This wasn't just a creative acting choice to make Malcolm seem like a gentle, patient child psychologist. It was a highly calculated narrative decoy. Because Malcolm is dead, he is operating on a completely different existential wavelength than the living. By slowing his speech down to a near crawl, Willis perfectly simulates the delayed processing time of a spirit trying to interact with a reality that has already moved past him. It creates a hypnotic, slightly detached atmospheric rhythm that slows down the entire energy of his scenes, conditioning the audience's brains to accept his passivity as professional depression rather than what it truly is, the hollow echo of a ghost. Secret 11. Toni Colletta's no eye contact rule. Toni Collette's performance as Lynn Sear is the emotional anchor of the entire movie, but her blocking required a grueling level of physical and psychological discipline that almost entirely relied on a strict no eye contact rule. In every single scene where Malcolm is present in the room with Lynn and Cole, such as the tense living room sequence after school, Collette had to navigate the space while completely erasing Bruce Willis from her field of vision. If her eyes flickered toward him even once, the entire illusion would instantly shatter. To achieve this, Collette intentionally hyper-focused her gaze on objects just past Willis's shoulders or kept her eyes glued to the floor, and her son's face. She had to project an aura of overwhelming maternal exhaustion, stress, and distraction to justify why she was completely ignoring a grown man sitting right across from her. This forced restriction meant she couldn't rely on normal acting cues or peripheral vision, creating a bizarrely disjointed, deeply tragic physical barrier where she is entirely blind to the savior helping her son right under her nose. Secret 12. The Hidden Bruises. Long before Cole explicitly tells Malcolm his terrifying secret in the hospital room, the film drops a deeply unsettling, blink and you miss it visual spoiler regarding the true nature of the ghosts. When Cole is at the birthday party and hears the scratching coming from the locked closet under the stairs, we catch a very brief, shadowed glimpse of the spirit trapped inside, the ghost of a young boy from a past decade. If you look closely at the boy's neck and wrists in that brief flash, you can see faint, dark purple fingerprint bruises etched into his skin. This subtle makeup detail completely spoils the cause of death and the dark reality of the spirit world before the narrative ever explains it. The ghosts aren't just spooky, glowing apparitions. They carry the literal, physical trauma of their demises explicitly on their bodies. By planting these horrific visual markers early on, the production team subtly prepared the audience's subconscious for the devastating reveal of Kira Collins later in the film, proving that the afterlife in Shyamalan's universe is a place of raw, unhealed physical history. Secret 13. Cole's Physical Shields. Cole Sear's constant state of supernatural terror forces him to develop a series of highly specific, instinctual coping mechanisms that function as psychological and physical shields. Throughout the entire film, Cole is almost never seen without some form of physical barrier protecting his small body from the outside world. He wears his father's oversized, clunky old eyeglasses, wraps himself in heavy winter coats even indoors, and builds a makeshift sanctuary inside his bedroom using a bright red pup tent surrounded by stolen religious artifacts. This behavior goes far beyond typical childhood anxiety. Cole is fully aware that ghosts can materialize anywhere, but his young mind desperately clings to the belief that if he can physically restrict his line of sight or build an enclosed, sacred boundary, the spirits won't be able to reach him.
The Sixth Sense is a most unusual psychological thriller, and its huge success in America is rather surprising. Cole is haunted by visions of dead people. The little boy is plainly terrified.
The religious figurines he steals from the local church aren't just toys to him. They are literal spiritual armor meant to reinforce his fort. The tragedy of his character is that these shields are entirely placebo effects. The ghosts easily pass right through the fabric of his red tent, proving that his elaborate physical defenses are completely useless against the relentless demands of the dead. Secret 14. The Stuttering Stanley Cameo Link. In a pivotal classroom scene, Cole snaps at his history teacher, Mr. Cunningham, repeatedly calling him Stuttering Stanley, and exposing a deeply buried childhood secret that the teacher thought he had left behind decades ago. This explosive, terrifying outburst seems like a demonstration of Cole's erratic behavior and hidden anger, but it actually contains a profound cyclical narrative link that connects directly back to Malcolm Crowe's very first patient, Vincent Gray. The secret hiding within this confrontation is that Mr. Cunningham's childhood trauma mirrors the exact systemic failure that broke Vincent Gray and is currently threatening to destroy Cole. The school system treats Cole as a freak and an outcast, just as they did with Vincent, and just as they once mocked a young, stuttering Stanley. Cole's supernatural awareness allows him to pluck this painful memory directly from the teacher's mind, weaponizing it as a defense mechanism because he feels entirely cornered by an adult who is supposed to protect him. It shows that trauma in this universe is a continuous, unbroken chain, passing from generation to generation until someone finally listens. Secret 15. The Unspoken Funeral Protocol. The sequence at Kira Collins's wake is loaded with immense grief, but it also features a masterful piece of social engineering that completely hides Malcolm's ghostly status under the guise of tragic etiquette. Malcolm walks freely through the crowded house, stands directly next to the grieving father, and watches the funeral guests mingle. On a first viewing, the absolute silence directed toward Malcolm feels entirely natural. In Western culture, it is highly customary to give people intense personal space, silence, and quiet reverence during a wake or a funeral out of profound respect for their immense sorrow. Shyamalan brilliantly exploits this unspoken social protocol to pull off his grand illusion. The guests aren't ignoring Malcolm because they are being polite or wrapped up in their own thoughts. They are completely oblivious to his existence because he is a ghost. The heavy, stifling atmosphere of a house in mourning provides the perfect narrative cover. Your brain naturally rationalizes why nobody greets him, hands him a drink, or offers a polite nod when he enters the room. By staging this critical interaction at a funeral, the film cleverly turns a room full of living people into an unwitting assembly of actors who perfectly simulate the isolation of the dead. With the psychological defenses of the living thoroughly exposed, how did the actual production architecture and hidden script deceptions manage to trick the biggest studio heads in Hollywood? Secret 16. The real-life church sanctuary rules. When Cole seeks refuge inside a grand, soaring Catholic church early in the film, the architectural staging feels deeply spiritual. We see him sitting alone in the pews, playing with his stolen plastic soldiers, while Malcolm watches him from the shadows of the nave. The hidden secret here lies in how the production team deliberately lit and framed this sanctuary to look less like a house of God and more like a high-security psychological asylum. Shyamalan and his cinematographer, Tak Fujimoto, intentionally shot these church sequences using extremely rigid, top-down geometric angles and harsh, cold light filtering through the stained glass windows. They strictly avoided the warm, golden candlelit glow typically associated with cinematic places of worship. This choice was a deliberate nod to the film's underlying themes of institutional isolation. The church is framed as a massive, echoing stone fortress where Cole is trying to hide from his terrifying reality. By utilizing towering vertical lines and keeping the background shrouded in deep, uninviting shadows, the architecture actively reinforces Cole's profound loneliness, signaling to the viewer that even the most sacred structures offer no true warmth or escape from the unrelenting burden of his supernatural gift. Secret 17. Donnie Wahlberg's extreme physical metamorphosis. The opening sequence of The Sixth Sense introduces us to Vincent Gray, Malcolm's former patient, who breaks into his home, delivers a chilling, unhinged monologue about being abandoned, and shoots the psychologist before turning the gun on himself. Vincent is played by Donnie Wahlberg, but his performance is wrapped in a dark, behind-the-scenes secret that completely redefined the stakes of the film. To play the emaciated, deeply broken young man, Wahlberg underwent a brutal, uncredited physical transformation, losing an astonishing 43 pounds in mere weeks by surviving on a near-starvation diet.
A lot of people make a big deal about the weight loss, because I physically sort of transformed, and that came by mistake. The first 2 weeks of sort of dieting and stuff, and I started to really suffer.
Wahlberg intentionally kept his drastic weight loss a secret from Bruce Willis and the rest of the crew until the very morning he stepped onto the set. When he finally appeared in the bedroom doorway, hollow-cheeked, shivering, and visibly vibrating with raw, nervous energy, the shock and horror you see on Bruce Willis's face is completely genuine. This extreme physical metamorphosis was critical for the movie's pacing. It instantly established the devastating, long-term psychological toll that the ghost world inflicts on a child who is left to deal with it completely alone, serving as a dark, prophetic mirror of exactly what will happen to Cole if Malcolm fails to help him. Secret 18. The Screaming Kitchen Cabinet Sequence. One of the most heart-stopping jump scares in modern horror history occurs when Lynn Sear turns her back on Cole for just a few seconds, only to turn around and find every single kitchen cabinet door and drawer violently flung wide open. This terrifying sequence is a masterclass in practical engineering that completely eschewed traditional cinematic editing tricks. Instead of cutting away to let a stage crew open the doors manually, Shyamalan insisted on shooting the entire event in a single, unbroken take to maximize the psychological shock. To pull off this illusion, the special effects team spent days meticulously rigging the entire kitchen set from behind the walls. Every single cabinet knob and drawer handle was attached to an intricate network of hidden pulleys, monofilament fishing lines, and spring-loaded hinges running through the drywall to a backstage control board. On the director's cue, a crew of half a dozen technicians pulled the wires simultaneously in perfect unison. By capturing this violent atmospheric shift without a single camera cut, the film denies the audience the comfort of a standard movie edit. It forces you to share Lynn's immediate, uninterrupted sense of violation and sheer panic, proving that the supernatural presence in the house can rewrite physical space in the blink of an eye. Secret 19. The pre-twist script title deception. Long before The Sixth Sense ever cameras rolled or became a box office phenomenon, M. Night Shyamalan had to pull off his very first deception in the boardrooms of Hollywood. When the screenplay was being shopped around to major studios, it didn't bear the iconic title we know today, nor was it pitched as a straightforward psychological horror film. In its earliest iterations, the script was titled The Earthborn, and was intentionally formatted to read like a gritty procedural crime thriller about a serial killer tracking down children. Shyamalan deliberately used this generic genre framing as a smokescreen to protect his monumental twist from cynical studio readers who famously flipped to the end of scripts. The early drafts completely omitted the supernatural terminology, referring to the ghosts merely as psychological manifestations of Malcolm's own post-traumatic stress disorder from his failure with Vincent Gray. By masking the supernatural elements under the guise of a grounded prestige detective drama, Shyamalan managed to completely blindside the executives at Disney and Spyglass Entertainment during initial script readings. This executive shock directly led to a massive bidding war, proving that the film's legendary ability to trick an audience was engineered into its very corporate DNA before a single frame was ever shot. With the script deception securing the film's future, only one final, microscopic visual cue remained to seal Malcolm's fate forever. Secret 20. The final breath cue. The ultimate secret of The Sixth Sense comes down to a single microscopic physical detail in the film's final moments that brings the entire narrative full circle. Throughout the movie, we have been conditioned to understand that cold condensation from an actor's mouth means a ghost is present. We see it with Cole's mother, we see it in the school hallways, and we see it in the terrifying kitchen sequence. But during the devastating climax, as Malcolm sits across from the sleeping Anna and finally accepts the reality that he died on the night he was shot, something incredible happens to his own physiology. For the first time in the entire film, Malcolm speaks, and a thick, heavy cloud of frozen breath pours directly from his own lips. It is a stunning, tragic piece of visual poetry. The cold air isn't reacting to an outside threat. It is coming from him. The moment Malcolm achieves total self-awareness and sheds his psychological denial, his physical form finally aligns with his supernatural reality. He realizes that he is the source of the drop in temperature, the ghost who has been chilling the rooms of his loved ones for months. This single frame serves as his official transition out of the living world, allowing his spirit to finally find peace and fade into the afterlife. When M. Night Shyamalan unleashed The Sixth Sense in August 1999, nobody anticipated a low-budget psychological thriller would morph into a global phenomenon. Produced for a modest $40 million, the film rode an unprecedented wave of intense word-of-mouth marketing, exploding into the second highest-grossing movie of the year globally, behind only Star Wars Episode I. It smashed standard box office patterns, spending an incredible 5 consecutive weeks at number 1 and ultimately hauling in a massive $672.8 million worldwide. The industry shockwaves didn't stop at the box office. While horror-adjacent films are routinely snubbed by elite voting bodies, The Sixth Sense commanded absolute artistic respect, securing 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. It permanently elevated 29-year-old Shyamalan into an overnight auteur and fundamentally redefined how Hollywood engineered tension. Decades later, its cultural success isn't tied to financial metrics, but to how seamlessly I See Dead People saturated the global lexicon. It proved that a narrative built on emotional grief and hyper-precise puzzle pieces could completely captivate mass audiences, establishing a masterclass in mainstream genre filmmaking that remains entirely unmatched. When you look back at The Sixth Sense, it becomes abundantly clear why it remains an absolute pinnacle of cinematic storytelling. It isn't a cheap trick movie that loses its flavor the second you know the punchline. It is a meticulously engineered clockwork mechanism where the second viewing is arguably even more rewarding than the first. By hiding 20 layers of visual, audio, and psychological secrets directly in our line of sight, Shyamalan didn't just trick us. He invited us to participate in a masterclass of structural filmmaking that still haunts cinema over 2 decades later. If you loved diving into these cinematic secrets, hit subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive into movie history.